Netanyahu has every incentive to keep this war going forever. He has every incentive, and so does his war cabinet, to expand this war. And they have been teasing for a while a more aggressive approach with regard to Lebanon and Hezbollah. And it looks like that day may fast be approaching. Let's put this up on the screen. According to Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Israeli troops will, quote, very soon go into action near the country's northern border with Lebanon. Gallant told troops near that border with the besieged Gaza Strip that others were being deployed to Israel's north. Quote, they will go into action very soon. He added reservists would be gradually released to prepare and come ready for future operations. Now, obviously, there's already been fire exchange. There's been sort of back and forth skirmishes with Hezbollah along this region. But Saagar, they seem to be indicating that a broader offensive and opening up an entirely new front officially in this war, that this could be coming in mere days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're saying it very openly. I believe the defense minister whenever he says that you will be in action sometime soon. And I think that is, look, even the most pro-Israel people, Barry Weiss, for example, who's just in Israel, she put out some tweet after her visit and all of that. And she said, even here in Israel, it's a matter of if, not when. It's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when in terms of Lebanon. And it will be 10 times what we have seen in Gaza for the Israelis in terms of the price that they would pay. For the domestic populace in particular, this would really bring the war home in a way that not even October 7th necessarily did, because we're talking about conventional war, not terrorism. Day by day, missiles and others that can penetrate the Iron Dome and put hundreds of thousands of people and really at risk, but in terms of in terms of where they're sleeping. There's already been the largest internal resettlement in the history of the state of Israel, evacuating the northern border. But many Israeli towns, cities, and others would very much be within the range of Hezbollah missiles and rockets. It would require the remobilization of the IDF, which, let's be honest, has not exactly colored themselves in glory from a tactical military perspective in their conduct with Gaza. Well, Hamas is nothing compared to the battle-tested guys in Hezbollah who've been fighting in Syria now for like a decade. I mean, these are people who are there. You could compare it like to the Japanese military in the 1940s, which had honed their skills, their military leadership, and others for a previous decade in China and Manchuria and elsewhere. I mean, these were people who are very battle-tested, very battle-hardened, and well-equipped and supplied in a way that Hamas did not even come close. And I'm not sure that. I think we can all just, say very clearly that if Gaza bled out to the Houthis and to killing American service member in Jordan, then we should multiply the same 10. The same 10 factors should apply for Bahrain, for our troops in Jordan, Syria, Iraq, for what that would look like. I think it would turn things up to a whole other level. The other important thing we should note is that Hezbollah is a much more strategic ally to the Iranians than Hamas was. Hamas is like a convenient thing that's out there. They fund them, but it's not like they're not like blood brothers in the same way. Hezbollah is a whole other story in terms of the way that the Iranian regime and Hezbollah have been, kind of hand in glove now for decades, especially with Nasrallah, their leaders. So if this is going to happen, it's going to be a full-blown regional war. I don't think we should go away from that. And they're the ones who are saying, I don't know why, we're the ones who are obviously, since we're already with Gaza, are the ones who are paying the outer price, that we're not doing anything about this. But apparently we're not. If they're willing to say it openly, then they don't care. They either are not listening or they just don't care what we have to say. Probably both.
And they've been saying it openly from the beginning. I mean, how many comments did we talk about where Yoav Gallant and others were saying, hey, we could turn Beirut into Gaza Strip? And look at what has happened in Gaza, what an ominous, horrifying thing that is to say at this point. I also think it's really important to keep the big picture in mind here. Hezbollah had nothing to do with October 7th. They weren't connected to that at all. So, the logic of this is insane. There is no logic to it outside of Netanyahu and his, Yoav Gallant and the rest of the ministers in the war cabinet, their own desire to save their political skin, especially because the reality is their goals in the Gaza Strip, their stated goals in the Gaza Strip of eliminating Hamas, which was not the real goal, but their stated goals of eliminating Hamas, was never possible, even by their own standards and by their own metrics. They have really dramatically failed. They have not been able to kill any of the top leadership in the Gaza Strip. They have not been able to, with their military, secure the release of the hostages. The only time hostages were released were because of diplomatic negotiations. In fact, the military methods are contrary to keeping the hostages safe and being able to return them home. They have not even destroyed a majority of the tunnels. 80% of the tunnel network is still operational and still fine. So what they have been able to do, which is consistent with some of the real goals, is to create conditions of absolute hell and horror and destruction of complete civilian life on the ground in the Gaza Strip as a sort of warning and a potential deterrent and a method of hopefully pushing Palestinians completely out of the Gaza Strip. And, Egypt is now taking a hard line against that. The U.S. claims to be against that as well. But as I'll, go through a report in a moment that describes how many of the cabinet ministers in the Israeli government, they don't care what we say. They're still out there aggressively advocating for exactly that ethnic cleansing plan, which has been part of the aspirational goal from the beginning. So the only logic here for expanding this front is to give Netanyahu some sort of military victory, to keep the war going for as long as possible so that he can try to cling to power. That's what's going on here. And, to your point, Saagar, about how the U.S., we've claimed from the beginning, we don't want this to spill over into a broader conflict. How's that going for you? How many fronts are being engaged on at this point? And the total insanity of the fact that these people, Biden and others, are admitting that they know our foreign policy is basically stupid and insane, but they can't help themselves from pursuing the stupid and insane foreign policy anyway.
Yeah, you're right. And, a lot of this, look, I would hope for a ceasefire deal that may or may not be in progress right now. We're trying to monitor it live. Let's put this up there on the screen. So as of yesterday, it seemed like there was a maybe. It said negotiators are closing in on a hostage deal. It would halt fighting in Gaza for weeks. Some of the details, Krystal, I'm still curious if you want to break it down, what is exactly real and not, because there's so much conflicting information.
Right. Well, Saagar, the context of your comments and why you're sort of soft pedaling it is because we also got comments from Netanyahu this morning, basically pouring cold water on the contours of the deal that has been outlined in various press reports. So put the next piece on the screen from Axios, which had more detail about what supposedly this potential deal could contain. They say Qatari and Egyptian mediators to present Hamas with a framework this week for negotiations over a 3-phase deal. The first phase would include a 6-week pause in fighting, release of roughly 40 Israeli hostages in exchange for Israel freeing, the numbers I saw were hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. If you read into this report, they have more details on what these phases would theoretically be. The way that it's presented here by this reporter is effectively like this is being brought to Hamas as a potential framework. My understanding is this is based on some, discussions via mediators with Hamas about what might be acceptable to them as well as part of a deal. So it's not like they're just have no idea whether this would be potentially, a fruitful direction to engage in with Hamas. They have some idea that potentially they could agree to this as well. The first phase is that 6-week ceasefire, release of a set number of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for Hamas freeing 35 to 40 Israeli hostages. This would include women, older men, so men over the age of 60, and those who have serious medical conditions. Then the second 2 phases, they haven't fully agreed on the details. The idea would be they'd sort of lock in stone the idea for the first phase, who would be released, how many Palestinian prisoners, how long it would go for. They'd have a rough idea of the second 2 phases, that's phase 2 and 3, but wouldn't fully lock that in until they were in initial phase 1. But they say the second phase is expected to include the release of Israeli soldiers and civilian men under the age of 60 from captivity in Gaza. So basically like military age men and actual soldiers would be released. For additional Palestinian prisoners. In the third phase, you would include the release of bodies of hostages who have been killed, which are being held by Hamas. For each stage, they say a different key would be determined for the number of Palestinian prisoners to be released. The duration of the second and third stages has not yet been defined, and that would be determined in the negotiations. But the idea is it would be several more weeks of a pause in fighting in addition to the original 6-week ceasefire, which is why you're hearing, reports that this would be a roughly 2-month ceasefire. Now, after having said all of that, we have comments from Netanyahu this morning basically saying, no, we're not going to release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. We are not going to remove Israeli IDF forces from the Gaza Strip. So whether these negotiations are still possible, whether they're ongoing, we just can't say at this point whether this is a real direction or not.
Right, exactly. And that's really the TLDR. Is like in this morning, President Netanyahu is like, no, I won't release anybody. I won't. I mean, I just think that the schizophrenic nature of the negotiations and all of this just highlights the problems inside of Israel. Is that Netanyahu's got an extreme right-wing coalition. They're the only people who are protecting him as long as he advances their aims. They don't want a ceasefire. They want war with Lebanon. They literally said it.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.